fame and fortune, or at least find a man who might sweep me off my big feet. A tall man. This was several years ago, but even then it was hard to find reasonable rental apartments. Now, it's impossible. Anyway, I ended up in a closet on West 76th Street. It was before the West Side became Madison Avenueized, and there was a small-town flavor about Columbus and Amsterdam that I liked. Also, my apartment was so small that I could furnish it in Salvation Army traditional for less than $500. So there I was, living in glittery Manhattan and too poor to do much else than sightsee, eat tuna fish sandwiches, and agonize over the Times want ad pages as if they were reprints from remembrance of things past. I had a number of discouraging interviews, none of which led to anything much. For a while, I sold men's gloves at Macy's, worked behind the counter at Chock-full-o'-nuts, and addressed envelopes for a mail-order company that sold a baldness remedy and a wrinkle remover. My personal life during this period was something less than ecstatic. I met a few men who seemed to be hungry and lecherous, in that order. We usually settled for tuna fish sandwiches. I had no close women friends. I suppose I was lonely. But there was so much in Manhattan, so many things I wanted to see and do, I can't honestly say I was unhappy. I resolutely avoid self-pity. I had a brief affair, about 6 weeks, with a man a few years older and a few inches shorter than I. He told me he wasn't married, but he had been out in the sun a lot the previous summer, and his hands were still tan, except for a pale strip around his ring finger. He always took off his wedding band before he met me. I never told him I knew. But he was handsome and amusing. I knew it couldn't last, but that was all right. I often wondered why he started up with me in the first place, and then decided it was for the same reason some men climb mountains, because I was there. Also, there are certain men who seek the outre in their personal relationships. Very tall women, very short, the very obese, those exceedingly ugly, or for all I know, the crippled and the blind. The whole subject is too depressing to think about. Anyway, we broke up after 6 weeks, no tears. He went back to his wife, and I went back to the want ads. I answered a very short one requesting resumes be sent to a box number by anyone interested in becoming a secretary assistant salesperson for a numismatist. As a kid, I had collected Indian head pennies and buffalo nickels in an empty pickle jar. That was the extent of my knowledge about coins. But nothing ventured, nothing gained, so I sent off my resume with a covering letter. I remembered I answered a half-dozen ads in a similar fashion that weekend and had no high hopes for any of them. But 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the numismatist asking me to come in for a personal interview. I was tempted to dash to the library and bone up on the history of coinage, but then decided it would be a waste of time. A few days of cramming would never convince him I was an expert. If he wanted to hire me, he'd have to live with my ignorance. His name was Enoch Wattle, and he had a small, dusty shop on West 57th Street. It was really a hole-in-the-wall kind of place, with one narrow, barred show window. The entrance was kept locked, and when I rang the bell, he peered at me from behind a torn green shade. I held up the letter I had received. He examined it carefully, then opened the door just wide enough for me to slip through. He stared up at me, smiled, and said, "You're hired." I worked for Enoch Wattle for almost 3 years, the two of us alone in that dim, cramped shop filled with locked glass cabinets and a safe in the back room as big and heavy as a bank vault. We started out as Mr. Wattle and Miss Bateson. Within 6 months, we were Enoch and Dunk. He was the dearest, sweetest man who ever lived. Pushing 70 with a nimbus of snowy white hair surrounding his skull like a halo, he was terribly afflicted with arthritis, could hardly handle the coin tongs, which was why he had advertised for an assistant after working by himself for so many years. He had been a widower for 20 of those years, and now lived alone in a dinosaur of an apartment house just a block from his store. His only
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.